Hello and welcome to our channel. The past few weeks I was suffering a bit from the so-called winter blues, and so I started thinking about things that could lift my spirits. In other words, what always makes me happy? Well, buying a new motorcycle does, and so I bought this. This is a Honda VTR1000F. It's also called the Firestorm, and the official Honda designation for this model is SC36. In the US, I believe it's called the Superhawk. Now, the Firestorm is one of those motorcycles that had always escaped my attention. Of course, I was aware of its existence, but I'd never seriously considered it. Until very recently, I had been mostly interested in Honda's 4-cylinder motorcycles, but now I was looking for something with a little more character. I also wanted something reasonably reliable because I've had some mechanical issues with the last motorcycles that I bought, and I was getting a little tired of that. I also wanted something cheap, mainly because I'm cheap myself, and so at one point the Honda Firestorm came on my radar. And yesterday I was able to buy this one, a relatively fresh example from 2004 with 27,000 kilometers or 17,000 miles on the clock. So in this video I just wanted to do a little walk around and share with you my first impressions of the bike. I suggest we start with the most obvious, the fact that it is painted dark grey or black in a matte finish. This color only became available on the later models of the Firestorm. Most of the early models you see are either red or yellow. Personally, I do like bright colors, and I think red really suits a Honda. But of course, when you buy used, you don't always have a choice about the color. Meanwhile, I also think that the bike looks perhaps less dated in this matte black than it would look if it had been bright yellow. So all things considered, I'm pretty happy with the color. Let's move on to the front. We all know bikes have faces, and some even have really ugly faces, but I think the Firestorm has a pleasant face. Not overly aggressive, but not too friendly either. I also noticed that the mirrors have a glossy finish, which is quite exceptional, as often with Honda they're just finished in matte plastic. It's only a detail, but an important one nonetheless, because I think the glossy black of the mirrors fits nicely with the matte black of the fairings. Now, if there's one thing I hate on motorcycles, it's tinted windscreens. And I'm also not a fan of double bubble screens, so you can understand how happy I am with this tinted double bubble screen. I really don't like this cheap looking screen. I can hardly see through it when I'm lying flat on the tank, and I also think the double bubble ruins the profile view of the bike. The screen actually changes the shape of the front cowl and almost makes the bike look like an upright model, like a Yamaha Phaser or something, whereas the original Honda screen nicely follows the shape of the front cowl, giving the bike a sharper and sportier nose. Also, the original clear screen has a Honda logo right here, which nicely ties up the front look of the bike. So by now you will have understood that I like to have my bikes as standard as possible. I don't like any additions or modifications, aside perhaps from a nice exhaust or a tail tidy. Actually, I prefer my motorcycles the way they came from the factory, which means that I have a problem because this bike has more aftermarket parts than I would like. Take this carbon front fender for example. Apparently it's made by a company called Carbon One Production or Carboni One Production. I couldn't find anything about this company on the internet, so if anyone has more information about it, I'd love to hear it. Now, my first instinct is to replace this fender with an original one. On the other hand, it is real carbon, and it's clear that this fender has been on the bike for some time, probably from when the bike was new. It also must have been an expensive part in 2004, so it shows that the first owner loved this Firestorm. So actually I'm inclined to keep this aftermarket fender based on the fact that it is period correct and the fact that it was put on there by someone who clearly cared for this bike. I like how the gold colored Nissan brake calipers contrast with the light grey of the front fork and the dark grey of the fairing. By the way, the fork is a conventional fork, not an upside down fork, and this is where the bike shows its age, I think. Also, if you were to conclude from this conventional fork that the Firestorm was not conceived as a sports bike, you would be mistaken, because both the front and rear suspension are adjustable for preload and rebound damping. These horrible aftermarket turn signals are fake carbon and their lenses have gone milky, and so these need to be replaced as soon as possible. In 2001, the Firestorm received an upgrade which included a larger 19-liter tank. I do find the gap between the tank and the frame to be unusual. On most bikes, the bottom of the tank would follow the line created by the frame, like it does on the Honda VTR SP1 and SP2. But on the Firestorm there's a gap showing the airbox, and I actually quite like that because now the tank looks like a real gas tank that is sat on top of the engine rather than an element of styling. On the sides of the tank, of course, we find the Honda logo, and on the side fairing it says VTR and Firestorm, all in silvery reflective decals. I do like the name Firestorm, although I've unintentionally said Fireblade a few times already. I think that some of the early models have an extra decal on the tail section that says 90 degrees V2, and then the abbreviation for dual overhead camshaft, but my bike doesn't have that sticker. I don't know what color these crash bunks were originally, but they seem to have faded to a bluish grey color. At the back, just above the exhaust and attached to the passenger pegs, are two more, and I think this abundance of crash bunks shows once again that the previous owner was very proud of this bike and really didn't want any crash damage. Obviously these crash bunks are not very pretty and my fingers are itching to remove them, but of course you're going to see me drop the bike the day after I remove them. And so, because I am a coward and I don't dare to tempt fate, they are staying on for now. From the looks of my bike, you might think that all Firestorms came with a full fairing, but they didn't. The Firestorm came from the factory with some sort of miniature fairing or a spoiler around the bottom of the engine. I have an extra piece of fairing at the bottom, you might call it a belly pan, and because it's made of fiberglass and I also see some color difference in the paint between this part and the side fairing, I'm going to assume this wasn't an official Honda option, but it would be great if someone could confirm that in the comments. One of the few aftermarket replacements that I do approve of are these Dominator exhausts, currently with their DB killers removed. Dominator exhausts are manufactured in Poland and perhaps they are not the most premium brand, they certainly are not Chinese knockoffs either. I like that these end cans are reasonably long and similar in shape to the original exhaust. I think if I remove the Dominator stickers, few people would notice that they are not the original exhaust pipes. Anyway, they sound good, and at the end of the video, of course, I will let you hear them in all their glory. Above the rear tire then we have another aftermarket part, a hugger and chain guard in one piece, again in carbon fiber. The Firestorm originally came without a hugger, but for now I will leave it on the bike because it's still winter, with all the rain, the dirt and the road salt. Having a hugger is perhaps not a bad idea. Given all the aftermarket parts on this bike, I am surprised to see the original rear fender is still intact, because usually this is the first item to be chopped off or to be replaced with a tail tidy. Now, I'm not opposed to tail tidies, but on a future classic like this, I also like it when the original rear fender is still there. What's strange then is that the taillight has a clear lens, which I don't think is original, not even on a Euro spec Firestorm. I am not 100% sure, but I believe all Firestorms came with taillights with red lenses. Again, it would be great if someone could confirm this in the comments. Like I said before, I like my motorcycles to be as original as possible, and so I get really excited when I see the original warning labels still on the swing arm. On the tank there should be some too, but unfortunately these have been removed. Now, I have very little to say about the seat except that it is comfortable. The interesting thing about the seat cowl is that it doesn't replace the passenger seat but actually covers it, which is something Honda did on other models as well, such as the VFR. The choke lever is located on the left side of the motorcycle, and the switchgear is the same one Honda have been using since the Second World War. Just kidding, of course. By the way, the indicator switch already shows the first signs of Honda's famous sticky button problem. The dashboard on this Firestorm is the updated version. Before 2001 the clocks had a white background, but this is the version with the dark background and the additional digital display. With that display also comes a fuel gauge, which is pretty handy because I've already noticed that the Firestorm is quite thirsty. I can't help but wonder if the speedometer isn't overly ambitious with an indicated top speed of 280 km per hour. I suppose there's only one way to find out. By the way, the analog speedo does not make it very easy to keep to the speed limits. In my country, for example, most legal speeds are between 30 and 70 km per hour, so that corresponds to this very limited range on the speedo. In other words, I think I would have preferred to have a digital speedo. I'm not sure if I think the Firestorm is a beautiful motorcycle. It's certainly not an ugly bike, but at the same time it's a bit nondescript. I think if I closed my eyes, I'd have a hard time drawing the bike from memory. It has a lot of swooping lines that are pleasing to the eye, but they don't really set the bike apart. The Firestorm definitely has a certain charm, but at the same time it lacks the charisma of the Italian V-twins. Of course, it's still a Honda, and so perhaps its virtue lies in the famous Honda build quality combined with the very distinct character of the lumpy V-twin engine. But I will come back to that in another video. In this video I just wanted to share with you my first impressions of the Firestorm while the bike is still fresh to me. I have now owned the bike for a grand total of 1 day, so I would love to hear from people who have owned this bike for a longer period of time. Please tell me what I can expect from this bike and what the common issues are that I need to be aware of. In the next video I will probably go into the riding experience, so don't forget to subscribe if you want to see that video, and in the meantime I'll leave you with the glorious sound of my new bike.